I'm Mark Vail, and I'm just honored to be here with Malcolm. If you can see the picture up here, this was taken, was this in 2000?
This was at the Smithsonian Museum. I think it was 2002 or 2003. It was at the exhibitions commemorating the 300th anniversary of the invention of the keyboard. And it was called The Keyboard Meets Modern Technology. This was a symposium, it was a 3-day symposium. And we were on the panel, Keith, Bob, and I were on the panel there. And so this is a picture of us in the hotel. It's a very poor picture because it was just taken with one of those, camera phones. But it's somewhat historic now that Bob has passed away. And so that's the three of us with Malcolm in the middle. So, and the interesting thing was, last year, I was, or rather earlier this year, I was at NAMM at the request of the Moog Corporation because they were re-releasing the modular system. So I told you I would need these throat strings. And they asked me to come and demo the modular system for them because Bob was no longer with us. And I was sort of like the elder statesman. I had more experience of the actual innards and the connections and the technology of the Moog than any other living person. I had more experience of patching it because of Tonto, which has 2 Moog 3Cs in it. So I was the natural choice as far as they were concerned. And they invited me to come to NAMM and paid my way, and very generous to me, very nice. And I spent 2 days from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. I never left the booth, never got a chance to look at the rest of NAMM. But just demonstrating the 35, and I used my little Evie. I don't know how many of you have seen me play this at the show here. It's my new love, okay? My new synth love. It's really back to the basics, the Evie. It's made by Niles Steiner, and the one that I have was made sometime in the early 70s. I haven't had it that long. I got it from the patch man.
Matt Traum?
Matt Traum, who's the patch man. He is the guy who does all the wind instruments. He's the guy, he's the go-to guy. And I asked him if he could put voltage control output for filter, breath control, and for pitch. And he said, no problem. And so perhaps it, so I was patching, I was able to patch the Evie, the electronic valve instrument, into the 35, Moog 35, which was a lot of fun. I also brought my little joystick, not the original because that's up in Calgary. But you want to show the joystick?
Well, did you have your Evie midified? Is it transmits MIDI now?
No, but what I'm doing is I found some people in Germany, Doppler I think they are, and a couple of other people who have these modules. What's the name of that chip? The Arduino?
Arduino.
Oh, Arduino.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And they both use the same chip. And there's a couple of people who make CV to MIDI converters. So I decided that would be the way to go. Because I spoke to Matt about it, and he said, that's a bit hard. So I said, okay, I'll figure that in out. So I got a CV to MIDI converter, but I'm still looking for a power supply for the because I don't have any of this, the Euro-Rack stuff. Although I do have the website, Tonto Euro-Rack and EuroRackTonto.com, so I'm sort of all set up, ready to go. And I was hoping to meet a young manufacturer here, a young somebody who would be interested in doing it. But I see there are little Tonto cases everywhere, so I think I'm a bit late. They might want the name though, and the blessing.
We're going to jump way back in history to 1953,
yes.
July. What were you doing here?
I was born in 1937, so that makes me, what, 16 then. And this is me messing around, trying to get 2 walkie-talkies that were just demobilized. They were from a surplus store. There's a lot of surplus equipment around after the Second World War that you could just buy in the surplus store. And my friend and I, Derek Sampson, he was my best friend when I was a kid, we lived on the opposite side of the main road. So we couldn't run a cable across to talk to each other, and telephones, we weren't allowed to use the telephone. You know, our parents in England, using the telephone was like a big deal. And you can't tie up the line. You guys talk for hours, you can't tie up the line. So we decided we had to find a way of communicating. So we went to the local store, and I was the one who was the tinkerer. Derek turned out to be he later went on to become a very fine doctor. He was a surgeon, and he specialized in the liver. And unfortunately, he caught the disease from one of his patients and died about 20 years ago. It was very unfortunate. But he was my childhood best friend. We used to walk around talking, used to walk around incessantly. We talked all the time. And he was interested in things like, you know, Freud and medical stuff and so on. And I was interested in technical stuff, and we sort of like cross-fertilized, and we talk about these things. So we came up with the idea that these walkie-talkies that were available in these surplus stores, of course none of them worked, we found when we got them home. We bought a couple of them, and here's me trying to get them to work. I did eventually do it, but you can see the manual. Down here is we called them valves in England. Here's the manual with all the valves. And I'm in there with a test cable and, of course, my incessant glass of lemonade. Derek took that picture of me doing that. He said, you know, I don't know, you're such a boffin, but I have to take a picture of you. So
I see a slide rule. There's a slide rule.
Yeah, that's it. I was totally into being an engineer.
How many use the slide rule?
Right.
Half of it. We can tell who the youngsters are.
Actually, there is no real good replacement that I've seen for a slide rule online. Does anybody know of one? I mean, there's calculators, but not slide rules.
You can buy them on eBay.
What?
Slide rules.
No, I'm not talking about the slide. I'm talking about an app or something that replaces the slide rule. Maybe I should write one.
Now, this person must have been quite influential to you.
Somewhat. This is my mother. As you can see, this is her publicity picture. In the 1930s, I was born in 1937. In the 30s, she was very famous. She was known as the Queen of the Accordion. But she was actually a very fine concert pianist and violinist. And at the age of 9, she was performing Mendelssohn's Meditation on violin and playing the Grieg piano concerto at the same concert at 9 years old. So she was very talented. My grandfather was, I don't have a picture of him, but my grandfather was actually born in America. As I think I might have, did I explain this to anybody? No, I don't have to revisit that one. But he was an organist. So he made sure, he didn't read a note of music, but he could play anything he heard. So you only had to hear it once. Doesn't matter what was classical, popular music at the time, anything. He could just play it. And but he made sure that my mother was properly musically educated because he wasn't. And so, but she had the muse, the gene. So I get my musical gene from my mother's side of the family, and I get my technical gene from my father's side of the family because my father, my father's parents came from Russia, and they came at about 1911, just before 1911. Had to be about 1907 or 8, something like that. About the same time as my mother's, my grandfather on my mother's side came over from the 1907 stock market crash. My father's parents came from Russia, and they were very fortunate. My grandfather on my father's side was a tailor and cutter, very good one, and he made clothes for the Tsar. He was, but he knew that something was up, and the Gulag was coming. So, and my grandmother is related to Blanche, my grandmother, on my father's side. She was a dental surgeon in Russia, very, very highly respected dental surgeon. Because when she got to England, they wouldn't let her practice because she was a woman. And so they had lots and lots of money. So she founded a dental hospital in the East End of London and became, that was her way of going. But she was very brilliant scientifically. So, she was, although she was in medicine, she had this scientific, right? So I think that's where I get the technical gene. And so they're both in me, hereditary.
We're going to take this to something that people will recognize. This is part of Tonto. This is Malcolm working at Tonto. Do you know approximately when this was?
Yes, this has to be in the 70s, between 72 and 74, because this is in, Tonto is situated, I can tell from where the lights are on the wall and everything. This is where it was in my living room in Point Doom in Malibu, where we moved it out of the record plant up to Point Doom to do things. And we had Weather Report came up there, made Tailspin. Joan Baez came, made Diamonds and Rust. We had a whole string of people came in there. Dylan came over, and we did some project with him. That was a whole other thing. So everybody and their brother was coming up there. Billy Preston came up there when we were working on It's My Pleasure, the album that we made with him. Making lots and lots of albums because we had the reputation of having the only in-tune synthesizer around in the early 70s. And that was something of a trick, as I think I mentioned, for those of you who heard the lecture last night.
Is that reversed?
That's what I was just going to say. It's the picture is reversed because...
Yeah, you can see Tonto backwards.
Yeah.
There you go. It's up not.
Because it says...
Who caught it? Oh, Don.
Yeah.
Good catch. Okay. Well, maybe this one's proper.
I think that one is proper. It may not be, but I'm screening Tonto, so...
What are you doing with your right hand here?
Oh, I'm having a sandwich.
You ate food where Tonto was?
Well, you get hungry, you know. Just programming it makes you hungry.
You know, my wife had just brought him a sandwich and insisted that I eat lunch. So there's the cup of coffee and the sandwich on the top of Tonto there, and I'm sort of playing around with one hand and reaching for the sandwich with the other.
How many of you are cringing having food and coffee? Yeah, I'm with you. So who helped you design the layout for the modules?
Well, the actual modules themselves, obviously the factory bought ones were designed by Bob Moog originally, but I had to modify it because I was trying to get ARPs and Moogs and EMS and Oberheims all to talk to each other. And as anybody here who's technical knows, whilst they're all 1 volt per octave on the pitch side, then when it comes to the triggering side, you're talking a whole another set of animals. They're all different. And so I had to come up with a mode of operation. And I absolutely, I feel that there were a few decisions that, Bob was a dear friend, particularly in the last 5 years of his life, we got very close. But, and also during the time I was building Tonto, before he realized I was using ARP modules. Because at that time he was suing ARP for the famous lawsuit for the filter. And as soon as he found out I was talking to David Friend and I had ARP modules going into Tonto, it was like, that's it. we're not working with you anymore. You have to pay full price for everything. But he'd already given me all the circuit diagrams and everything that I needed. So it worked out okay. But there were a couple of people that helped with the design. Serge was one of them. Now Serge Trepnin, he had worked with Buchler. He knew nothing about envelope generators. When I said to him, I want to do a voltage controlled envelope generator, he goes, what's an envelope generator? So I had to explain to him, and the first thing he built me was a dual slope generator, which was not what I was looking for, but it turned out to be very interesting, so we kept it as part of Tonto. And then I explained to him in great detail what it is I wanted. Because my idea was to take concept, in the middle here you'll see an EMS 256 sequencer with a keyboard above it. The EMS 256 was designed by Peter Zaneviev. And Peter and I, he's British, see, one of the things I used to do was call up these manufacturers and tell them all my ideas, because I wasn't interested in manufacturing, but I wanted them to manufacture the stuff and incorporate it in so I could buy it and use it. I didn't particularly want to build it, I'm too busy in the studio. So one of the people who helped me with the physical building was a guy called Ulysses S. Grant.
Wait a minute.
Come on.
Wait a minute.
No, not the general.
Oh.
This was a guy. He was he was an ex engineer, steel worker from Detroit. He'd been working on the presses in the factories where they pressed out the whole wings of cars and everything in one piece. And at one point, he almost got caught in the press. He had to roll out. He nearly got lost his life, and decided he didn't want to do that. So he came to LA, came to me through some serendipitous series of events, and asked if I had a job. And I said, well, can you know, I need somebody to do metal work, but I also need somebody to do wiring. Can you solder? He says, yeah, I can solder. I can do this. You know, I worked in a thing with wave soldering. So it turned out he was the perfect guy. He didn't know anything about circuitry, but he knew how to actually put it together. And he built, if you see this thing here on the left, that's that aluminum box there. Yeah, that is the power supplies for Tonto. He built that case. He also built all the module faces. He was the one who actually physically stood there with a file and with a drill and cut out all the panels, which I then had anodized and so on. And the patch bays, you see, Tonto is basically 19-inch rack with the ears cut off. So we bought patch bays, but we had to cut the ears off. Well, that was Louis Hewitt's job. And he did a fantastic job of cutting them off and creating new ways of mounting the patch bays. The patch bay in Tonto is horizontal. It goes all around the instrument on this level here. You can see it.
Did that require some special cabling?
Absolutely, yes. Tonto had special cabling, particularly when it came to power. One of the things we discovered was that I discovered very early on was one of the reasons the boat was going out of tune. I didn't mention this in the lecture last night, but I don't think I've mentioned this before anyway. But one of the reasons it was going out of tune was because of bean counters. You know, the people, those accountant types who say, no, we can't afford to pay for this, we've got to do this, has got to be cheaper. So, when Bob Moog designed the modules, he used to work for Kepco power supplies, and Kepco are laboratory standard power supplies. So he had Kepcos on the bench, and that's how he calibrated and worked everything. Then, when the actual instrument came out and went onto the market, Kepco's way too expensive, half the price of the instrument. So it was, oh, we've got to get a cheaper power supply. So they got a real cheapo power supply that was pretty well, it was supposed to be regulated, but it didn't, it was useless. And so one of the things I found out very early on was one of the reasons Tonto was going out of tune so badly and so often and being so sporadic and it just, you know, totally, you know, had a mind of its own. And it would depend on whether you had the lights on or not, and it would depend on the voltage in the wall, it would depend on the heat in the room. Also, it was the power supplies. They were varying, they were not stable. So one of the things I did, I spoke to Bob about this, and he said, oh yeah, I said, well, how did you, he said, I use these Kepcos. I used to work for Kepco. I said, oh, great. So I got four Kepcos for the power supplies, which are in that block. You can see it through the
I'll go back to this picture.
No, well, that one too. That's a good one. You can see them there. The top four, those bright sort of whitish ones in the silver block there,
Yeah.
they're Kepco laboratory power supplies. The bottom panel, I designed and built my own power supplies because there were 6 power rows, plus and minus 15 on the top there for the op-amp equipment. You know, for the balanced op-amp stuff, because op-amps were just about coming in there. We needed those for the Oberheims. We needed it for a lot of the modules that I put in, which had the ARP modules. The center section there is all the special modules that I built. And then the next 2 power supplies were plus 12 minus 6 for the Moog equipment, for the 3 Cs. And then the next ones down at the bottom were plus and minus 5. And the reason for the plus and minus 5, plus 5 for all the digital equipment in there, all the 7400 logic stuff, and there was a lot of it in there. And the minus power supply for all the lights. And the reason we used the minus power supply is because for some reason, I still haven't really figured out, but for some reason, it made less of a click when you put the switches in if the power supply was minus on the lights. I don't know why. Somebody might be able to explain it, but when you use -5 for the power for the lights, and there were a lot of lights on Tonto, so that was a huge power supply in terms of current. So that was a 30 amp power supply, the -5. The +5 was only 10 amps, and the two Kepcos were capable of supplying 15 amps. Now, why did we use 15 amps when all we were probably drawing from the whole instrument was maybe the most an amp? Anybody got an answer? Anybody technical enough here?
Overhead?
Overhead? Well, actually, it's, I don't know what you mean by overhead, but what we're talking about here is impedance. The more current an a power supply is capable of giving, the lower its output impedance. And you want a really low output impedance on anything that's voltage controlled, because from all intents and purposes, from the point of view of the circuitry, for those of you who are really technical, the power rail is considered signal ground. So, you know, your positive power and your ground, there has to be no minimum resistance there through the power supply. Otherwise, you get crosstalk. And that comes with, but it just builds up. You see, you hear the oscillators all over the place, even though they're not up, it's coming through the power supply, because there's resistance there, and that develops the oscillator, the output of the oscillator will be right there, because whether or not you've got it up, it's on the circuit. And so it's drawing the power, so it's going to be there. So the idea was to keep the impedance as low as possible. And we also needed to keep the impedance as low as possible all the way around the instrument. Now, the distance around the instrument, total, is 127 feet. Okay? And how that came to be was, I was looking at my usual source, which is surplus places. I found a surplus wire supply in Los Angeles. And it was on the other side, way on the other side of South of LA. Traveled all the way over there, and I'm going through all the cables, and I come across this cable. Now, what you want, excuse me, there's a water here.
I can't promise if that's fresh, but
Oh, we have here. There you go. I got it. Right. So the what you need for low voltage, right? You need very low resistance of the cable. That means pure copper wire. But you don't need to have fat cables with thick insulation because it's low voltage. You only need thick insulation if it's like above 600 volts. So if you're down and, you know, the sort of voltages we're talking about, DC and stuff, you want thin insulation. Well, what other things use DC? Battery power.
Telephone cable. Cars.
Well, we use the telephone connectors. We use North Globe connectors, which were telephone style connectors. But the cables that we used, if you think about it, the things that have low power, first of all, airliners. So all the wiring in the back of Tonto, which you can't see here, but I'll show you in the app in a minute. When we get the app up at the end here, we're going to show you the app iTonto, which shows you the back there. All the cables that go from the central power supply point where it enters the central section of each of these three major cabinets, where it fans out to every compartment, that's all surplus aircraft wiring from some Boeing aircraft, and there were these hundreds and hundreds of these. They already had one end that we put onto a terminal block, and the other end we took in and put onto a fan block, so that we had all six powers. We didn't know what we were going to put anywhere, so all six powers go to every one of the compartments, so you can move the modules around. You don't have to run power. A bit like the idea of the Eurorack, sort of, but not quite so well implemented, because we really didn't know where we were going, and I was trying to come from first principles. So that was the Boeing part of it, the aircraft part. But now, how do we connect the 127 feet? So I go to this surplus store and I'm looking around and I say, well, got any low voltage cable? What do you mean low voltage cable? Well, you know, real fat wires, plenty of copper, and very, very thin insulation. Oh, yeah, I think we've got a piece over here. It's a surplus. It's from an old Apollo project. So this is the perfect thing. And I decided never to cut that cable. So I put both ends to the 40 pins here, 40 pins here to an 80 pin north plug. And that left me with a ring. Now where did I come up with the idea of a ring? That comes from England. We have what we call mains. You would call it the power and the wall power, okay? We call it mains. And the mains in England is a loop that goes from the fuse box, or from the power inlet, all the way around the building to every place, and goes back to the fuse box and joins. Not positive to negative, but positive to positive, or, it's AC, so, hot to hot, neutral to neutral, ground to ground. But what that does is it effectively gives the electricity two routes to everything, which means that, electrically speaking, the length of the cable is halved, because the resistance is halved. So this is what I was looking for. So I decided to use the ring principle for the power. And in fact, we also used it for the control voltages, and we also used it for the triggers. When we tried to use it for the audio, we ran into, guess what?
Ground loops.
Ground loops, right. Couldn't use it for the audio. So it was not successful for audio, but it was perfect. For audio, we had to do home runs, but as you do in any studio. But for for all the control voltages and the triggers, and the trunk bolts too. The trunk bolts are these things in the middle here. You see let me see if I can I make it over there with this wire?
Oh,
Oh, it's just me. Good. The trunk bolts are these things here. There's a bolt for a standard bolt below the switch, which connects it to a trunk bolt. And when you push the switch lights up dim. And then all the other switches of the same trunk also light up dim. So you know that this is in use. Wherever you want to pick it up, they're also here on the arms. Okay? So wherever you want to pick it up, you see some of these are dim and some are bright. The bright ones are the ones that are connected. So that was how we communicated without having to have patch cords go right across the instrument. We had 12 of these, we called them trunk bolts. And they were very good for quick patching because you could pop it out, and then something wasn't connected, you pop it in and now it's connected. So you could change sounds, you could change controllers. It was a part of the playability of the instrument as well as being a convenience. So the trunk bolts were also wired in ring fashion. So we had these rings going around Tonto. The purpose of the rings was to keep the electrical distance down. So it was only 62.5 feet electrically from power supply to any given module. And the wire was number 10 wire. Okay? Actually, no, excuse me, it was number 8 wire. Number 8. Okay? And we're only putting an amp through this thing. So we were looking for minimum resistance. It's like real brute force engineering, the type of thing that I was taught at the London Polytechnic, where the only thing they taught me in electronics was line communication theory and light electrical engineering. That was the closest I could get to electronics. We did talk a little bit about thermionic valve, but that was about it. Very behind over there. So all of my learning about electronics came when I was in radar in the Air Force, and we worked on a Bendix gear, which was American, and that was where I really got my real thorough training. And I was component level service personnel, so I had to know everything, how the circuits worked, the values of each component, what the purpose of things were, so I could go through with scope, find problems. Because you don't have replacement modules in radar. It's far too complicated. And I was working on GCA radar, that's ground control approach, which is landing planes in bad weather, talking about people's lives. So, you don't want to mess around with that. And so everything has to be very reliable. And they want to make sure you're thoroughly trained. I have 9 months training. So that's what held me in good stead for the BBC production thing later. Anyhow, so that's how the wiring on Tonto was accomplished, and how we got the communications between the various sections. And it's an interesting thing, because Now with Eurorack, it's exactly the same problem, just smaller. Okay, and everybody's using thin wires. I noticed that. I think you need to start thinking about using pattern wires. There's more copper in them.
For the patch cords or
For
inside everything?
For the bus wiring and so on. I noticed that when they're doing the bus things, now they're starting to do buses with quite wide traces on the bus cards. But you wanted more than just on the bus cards. You needed like all the way to the module to keep it down. You also need it on the control voltages. So triggers are not so important, but the control voltages definitely, because you're going to get pitch changes. See, the thing is, 1 volt per octave is 83.3 recurring millivolts per semitone. That means that 1 millivolt variation is audible as a movement of more than a few cents. People like Stevie hear that. I can hear that. And it's an out-of-tuneness. So you don't even want a millivolt difference. And I used to align the instrument so that there was no more than a half a millivolt difference between any 2 points on the instrument when you plug it in, so to keep it in tune. That was the whole thing, because I was very tuning conscious about this, because that was the big problem. Tune. If you didn't have it in tune, you didn't have an orchestra. An out-of-tune orchestra sounds terrible. Nothing worse.
How many voices, how many, not voices, but how many notes of polyphony did you have at this point?
Well, initially, all we had was, I'll show you.
Okay. Well, if we can go back to the other.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, stop.
One more back. There we go. This keyboard here was mode keyboard, as you can see. That's monophonic. But below it, see this part of the keyboard black, this part's white? That's an ARP. And it's an ARP keyboard is split mechanically into 2 separate keyboards, and each one is 2 voice. So with very artful, somewhat complicated fingering, you could play 5 voices with this guy, 5 voices with this guy, because it was the same both sides. Okay? We also had an EMS sequencer here, and we had our EMS 3-stage touch sensitivity. Great first touch sensitive keyboard ever, the EMS 256. Done by the means of a late bus. On the mode, one of the differences between the keyboards. The mode keyboard gives out a gate, only a gate. That is, as long as you've got a key down, there's a voltage at what you call the gate or the trigger. And that gate on a mode keyboard is ground. Now, I have my differences of opinion with Bob about that choice, because that meant that any time you had a short to ground on a trigger line going to an envelope generator, it opened the generator up, which is like not what you want. You really want to have positive triggering, so you need +5 or +10 volts, which is what the standard moved to when ARP started. They started with the +10 volts, and then Oberheim went with the +5, and so the EMS had I think the EMS was +10. All different standards, and I had to decide on a standard, so I converted everything to the same standard, which was +10. So Tonto is +10 triggering. And the other thing is that the ARPs had a re-triggering mechanism, a mechanism they called re-triggering or triggering, which was just a pulse that happened every time you pressed any key. Now with the Moog, if you pushed the key down and held it down and played legato, as we say, and played the next note, next note, next note, well, if it was going downwards, it would move the pitch. If it was going upwards, it wouldn't. Okay, which is a pain to explain to piano players who are trying to play the thing, because the first thing a piano player does when they come up to a keyboard is go, this thing's broken. It's only playing one note. And they say, well, that's how it's designed. It's like a saxophone. You play only one note at a time. And they go, so they start playing one note at a time. They say, no, it's still broken. Look, it's not playing. And what they're talking about is going upwards, it won't work. Going downwards, it will. But if you don't lift, you don't get the gate doesn't lift and come back down, so the envelope generator doesn't re-trigger. It doesn't go back to the attack time. ARP created this extra trigger, so they had a gate and a trigger. And the trigger, every time you played a new note, the trigger would come down the line, which would set the envelope generator back to the initial attack. So the ARP was much easier to play, right? But they were very different. And of course, you could use an ARP keyboard to play a Moog, but it wouldn't recognize the Moog envelope generators, wouldn't recognize the triggers. So the trick got to be to use the Moog oscillators, which were nice and fat and sort of much more, to me, they were much more Rolls-Roycey, much more high-end than the ARP oscillators. So I would use Moog oscillators, Moog filters, and then the Moog VCA, which was pretty funky. It had this sort of it was actually not really a VCA. It's more of a ring modulator circuit. And if you look at the circuit, it's sort of a modified ring modulator. So it had a very funky way of dealing with waveforms that came in, depending on whether the positive going, the negative going, would change stuff. But in a way that was like more musical. It added more harmonics, which is the sort of the fatness. That was the thing. And the same thing applied with the Moog, because of the way that the Moog oscillators would work and the way that he had implemented the ladder filter. It was a very funky instrument. It added a lot of extra harmonics that you didn't have there originally, which helped because the formula for subtractive synthesis, which is what analog synthesis is in the main, is take you want a recipe, take a rich waveform, filter it, and pinch to taste. So you basically got the oscillators providing the rich waveform, you filter it with a filter, and now you pinch it on and off with a VCA. Okay, and that's driven by an envelope generator. Well, when it came to the envelope generator, now that's a control item. So I would use ARP envelope generators to fire the whole thing, right? It was all Moog right up to all the analog chain, and all the audio was going through Moog, but the envelope, the actual envelope that was firing the VCA was an ARP. Okay, that way I could get the ARP extra triggering and everything. But that's what made Tonto very unique, is that I could cross-patch modules from one manufacturer to another one and use the best modules of each, the ones that suited my purpose. So that's how we sort of managed to cross-fertilize everything. Of course, the purists didn't like this much, particularly Bob Moog, especially since he was suing ARP and I was into mixing the instruments. He sort of was like, don't want him to do that. Don't want him to do that. Don't wish to do that. Yes, but the ARP keyboards and the ARP envelope generators are sort of like a bit better than the ones you've got. You know, he didn't want to hear that. And I was actually too well-bred in the British sense to bring that up to him directly. So I would be very circumspect about it. But you know, I think he got the point a few times. And I also asked him the question several times, why did you not make the envelope generators voltage control? Because really what you want for touch sensitivity is you want to control the attack time. And you couldn't do that. So that's where a surge came in. And I wanted to have these voltage controlled envelope generators where I could change the attack time. And also, I wanted to change the release time. Now, how do we do that? We do that with touch sensitivity. So what was touch sensitivity? I spoke to Peter Zaneviev, who did the EMS, the thing that was at the back there. And I mentioned the late bus. What that is the keyboard there was a very simple keyboard. When you pushed the key down, there was not just the one contact there was the one contact for the voltage, there was one contact for the trigger, but there was a second bus that it contacted to a little bit later, which you could adjust. And what we did was, as you hit the first bus, it starts a ramp generator, and the second bus it stops. So depending upon how the velocity with which you're pushing it down, it would be, the voltage that ramp would reach would be proportional to the velocity. That's how we got velocity sensitivity. Of course, it's backwards. You have to invert the signal because, you know, when you push it down quickly, only it's only little. And when you push it down slowly, it's big, so you've got to invert it around. So bearing that in mind. But it was a very simple way to get touch sensitivity. And it was the very first one, and I had long conversations with Peter Zaneviev about implementing what I called the late bus. And he did it. I was very pleased to see that he actually did it. Because we've been talking about getting touch sensitivity into the AKS, the blue keyboard that doesn't have any moving parts. And I said to him, we've got to be able to make touch sensitivity happen. He said, well, how are we going to do that? I said, well, what if we were to put a crystal microphone, glue it to the circuit board, and then put a sample and hold on that was a latching sample and hold that latched to the highest voltage that came in and then held. Depending upon how hard you hit it, the noise would be louder than fast. So that's how we implemented touch sensitivity on an instrument that had no moving parts.
That's the touch plate right here, isn't it?
That's the one down there, yes, the little blue one, the blue synth that goes there. And so I talked to Peter Zaneviev about the blue synth. And so when we were talking about implementing a multi-level sequencer, because I wanted to have a sequencer that had more than one voice. And so we were talking about 256, and 256 is the magic number. It's the power of 2 to the 8th. So it sort of all worked with the TTL logic that we had at the time. And it was easy to make with the chips that were available, 7400 series logic chips. And so I had long conversations with Peter about this. And he said to me, well, what are we going to do? We're going to put a microphone in there? And I said, no, we can do the late bus technique. And I explained to him what my idea was, and he picked up on it. He actually made it. So I was very, very pleased to get that. So, move to the next level. How do we make a poly? This was a monophonic keyboard that you had to switch and play the levels like overdub. So it was only, the EMS was only a monophonic keyboard. And I designed this polyphonic keyboard, but it had, in order to work, it had to have one set of switches for each voice. And that's all 3 switches, the late bus, the standard bus, for the triggering. And so now you're talking about, say, 12 voices. You're talking about 12 times 3 is 36 switches under each key. It's going to be like lead to play. You know, no way of doing it. So in 1971, I had this design going. And we were at the Westlake Audio put on this, at the AES show, they let us exhibit Tonto. And they gave us this speaker fabric to put on the back to sort of like keep it a little bit secret behind there. I wasn't into keeping secrets. I was into sharing the technology because I wanted people to make it. And this group of Japanese guys came up and they started, oh, tell me how this worked. Well, taking pictures. I didn't know they were hitting Yamaha. Anyhow, I'm telling you all about it. And you have polyphonic keyboards? I said, well, not yet. You know, I have this idea. And there was this guy who was sort of like hanging around the stand. And very sort of, he was a strange fellow, to say the least, to put it lightly. This is him. Okay. You can see the eyes. Okay. That's Armand Pasetta. Now, Armand is a really interesting guy. At the time, he was into not having a license plate on his car because it was, again, you know, it wasn't part of the Constitution. Money was counterfeit because it wasn't in silver, which was part of the Constitution. He was a real constitutionalist at the basic level. And, you know, he was the sort of guy that would get thrown in jail for tax evasion rather than pay his taxes because there wasn't any money to pay taxes in because all this money is counterfeit because it's not redeemable in silver dollars and this whole thing. And he went through this whole, I mean, he was really into that type of thing. It's a strange sort of mind, but a very interesting and very brilliant guy. And so he comes up to me and he says, who are you talking to these people about? The key? You know, do you realize that you could probably do this digitally? And I said, really? I never thought of that. And he says, tell me the parameters. How much tuning error is going to be? I said, oh, no more than a cent or two. And he asked me all sorts of questions. And I just answered his question. He's writing all this down. Okay? I think nothing of it. 2 years goes by. I'm in my place in Point Doom. The synthesizer's been moved up to Point Doom, where you saw the picture of me eating the sandwich. My wife tried to keep me alive and well fed. And so there's a knock on the door. I go to the door, and this guy says, remember me? I said, you look vaguely familiar. He said, yes, so 1971, we talked about a polyphonic keyboard. I said, oh, yes, I remember. We said that we must have spent an hour together. He said, yeah. He said, I said, how did you ever get it cracked? He says, well, that's what I've come here about. I've got it in the car. I said, really? He said, but I've got no synthesizers to test it with. I want to see if it works. Can we test it on Tonto? I said, come right in. And he came in, and the first thing that he came with was, we don't have a picture of. It was very interesting, but it worked well enough that I ordered from him. I said, well, what would it cost to build a 12-voice polyphonic? Because I was thinking 5 fingers, 2 feet, 12-voice polyphony. My grandfather, the organist player, was thinking, we'll put foot pedals on Tonto, we'll have this incredible instrument with 12-voice polyphony. 12 voices of synthesizer, that's a lot. You can do anything with 12 voices. But 1 or 2 voices is very, very much more powerful. The sounds being so much purer, it's much more powerful than anything acoustic. You know, Beethoven would have loved the synth. You'd have been able to hear it. So, anyhow, I ordered this thing. Well, $17,000 later, he comes in with this. This is the 1973. Okay, this is 2 years after the meeting that we had, and $17,000 later, this is produced. This is the 12-voice version. Okay.
Did you pay him in silver?
Well, that's a very good point. No, I paid him in counterfeit money. American dollars. So, you notice there's only one set of red lights. There was only a single triggering. And so when he came in with it, the first thing I said was, well, you didn't put in the late bus. Oh, I didn't know you wanted that. That would be another $10,000. So, meantime, I said, okay, let's test it. So we plug it in, and with all 12 cards in and everything, I go to play it, it doesn't work. It sounds horrible. It's like, it's absolutely ludicrous. I said, this thing doesn't work. He said, well, I don't have synthesizers to test it with. So I said, well, you know, what's the reason? He says, I don't know. So I said, well, let's see, what can we do? So he said, well, why don't we pull the cards out, all the cards out except one, and see if one card works. So we did, and it did. So I go, oh, well, that's a good sign. So we put a second card in. That worked too. Third card in, that worked. I go, we're going good here. There must be a faulty card somewhere, okay? Put the fourth card in. That worked. Put the fifth card in. That worked. I'm going, whoa, 5 voices of polyphony. Put the sixth card in. Whoop, all gone. So I said, oh, that's the bad card. Okay, we change it to another card. Same problem. Every card we tried in the 6th slot didn't work. But then we went back and I said, well, let's check. It's got to be something in the design here. What's going on? He says, I honestly don't know. He says, I'm at the limit of my knowledge. I have absolutely no idea why it's doing it. I need to spend some time researching. I said, well, while you're at it, please add the late pass. Okay, goes away. And, you know, I agreed another 10 grand to do this thing, to fund him through there, to see him through this research. He goes away. Another 2 years passes. I'm trying to get a hold of him. I can't get a hold of him. I'm going, oh, my God, all this money's out the window. Bob Margolis, my partner at the time, is on my back about putting out money to people that are unreliable. What a stupid idiot I am, and he would never do that. And, you know. So eventually, I get a phone call from Harmon. And we used to have very long phone calls. And he says to me, well, he says, I figured it out. I said, what is it? He said, well, I had to go to work for digital technologies, the people who made the mini computers. He went to work for them as a service tech. He said, I needed to learn more about digital. He said, I figured out what it is. It's the plugs and sockets. The cards were very similar to the cards in the modular, which were two-sided printed circuit board with fingers on them, a 22-pin connector, which had a broad contact. He said, in the digital world, you can't have that. You have to have very narrow contacts because of capacitance. And particularly capacitance between the front and the back of the card creates a capacitor. At high frequencies, which is what clock frequencies in computers and the digital world is, they add. So as you add, as you plugged in more of these, it was shorting the bus down. That's what was happening. We were shorting all the clocks, all the digital signals. So he said, what I've done is I was able to build a 4-voice version. Now you see 2 of them there. He built more than one, but he didn't tell me. So he comes in with one of these. Now you notice there's 2 jacks down on the bottom there. The top 2 ones are control voltage. 2 of them, one for the, so we didn't have to mult, one for the oscillator, one for the filter. Because you want to track, there's one of the basic things in synthesis, you do want to track your filter with your oscillator, otherwise your sound will change as you go up the keyboard. So you need to move the filter parallel, you need the control voltage going to the filter to keep it tracking, okay? So that's what those 2 are. The bottom 2 are the bus, the first and the late bus. So finally I had my 4-voice with a late bus. He said, I'll leave this with you until I can get the 12-voice going. And he went away. And cut to the chase, I never got my 12-voice. I still have the 4-voice. And I recently spoke to Armin, and he's now doing other things. He's a crazy man. You read the pictures?
Oh yeah.
There it is.
Yeah, here we go.
This is what he's doing now. He's a crazy man.
He's a
built this from
superb violinist. He plays Irish music, and he's very good. He sent me a CD. He's a very good acoustic musician.
I had no idea that he played violin. At first I had it was when Mark told me about it here. So, he's a very secretive guy. Okay. And how secretive he was he potted all the modules that he made for me. Okay? They were all potted with epoxy. And he put too much curative in it. So over time, they shrank, and the cards curved, and now plugs wouldn't line up, you couldn't plug them in. So that was the basic thing, and I said to him, hey, you owe me a 12-voice. Well, one day, man, I'll get around to it. When I sell the idea, and he tried to sell the idea to so many people, but because he was so close to Cecil, wouldn't tell people how things worked, wouldn't share anything, no manufacturer would take him up on it. They all thought he was crazy. Which he sort of was.
What was this period?
Oh, this is where we had the this is the first. This is what, how do you use this? This is the first 4-voice that we built. This is the prototype 4-voice, sitting on top of the power supply.
1974.
Yeah, this was the year after the 1973 debacle. And then came the 12-voice with the curling cards that we could never use. I mean, it was supposedly perfect, but never got involved. This one.
I didn't think I apologized earlier on. I was looking at Finder. I didn't think I had this photo because I was looking for black and white one. On the right is Billy Preston. This was on the Midnight Special.
Yeah.
I remember the Midnight Special. Wasn't that a great show? What was going on here?
Well, Billy was hosting a Midnight Special, and we were making It's My Pleasure, the album at the time. And he really wanted to have Tonto on the Midnight Special. So we packed it up, brought it down. It's got a handle on the top, so it's portable. And we brought it down and we set it up, and it took 24 hours in the studio. Now the Midnight Special was a bit like the BBC rehearsed record thing. It was a one-time deal. It was supposedly live, but in actual fact it was recorded. But you only had one shot because of the cost of the lights and the crew and everything else. So we were there in the studio, setting up 24 hours beforehand. We get everything perfect. We get the song that we're working with Billy on. And as you can see, Billy and I here, we're having a great time. We're both playing keyboards. And that's Bob Margaret in the back, the guy who's at the back there, twiddling the knobs. And so we were playing away. We were having a really great time. It was wonderful. Except that at the very beginning, when they came in, and they turned the lights on, because they don't turn the lights on while you're rehearsing. They turned the lights on, they hit the lights hit the front panel of Tonto, temperature went up. The modes went flat, the arcs went sharp, the overhangs went sideways. I mean, everything was just, I was running around for the first 2 minutes of that show, trying to get everything in tune, which I finally succeeded in doing, thanks to the tuning buses that I had built, 10 tuning buses. And very accurate ones. And I was able to get it into tune. And then we did something which the producers of Midnight Special were really reticent to do, which was we edited the first 2 minutes out of the video before it went on the air, where I was doing all the tuning running around. So what went on the air was reasonably in tune. But we played this one song, Billy Preston and Bob and I. And there's a drummer at the side, Ollie Brown, who used to be Stevie's drummer, who's playing the Moog percussion controllers. And it was all pure Tonto. There was absolutely no other instruments involved. And we played a piece that I put onto my Red Hat album called Bittersweet. And that's the only piece that we have that's out there of the stuff that I did with Billy, because Billy really wanted to be part of Tonto's expanding headband. That was his whole thing. He says, hey, I'm an expanding headband. And he loved Tonto because he's a great keyboard player. And he and I used to get off together because I can play, keyboard fairly well, single note stuff. I'm not so good when it comes to the handfuls of chords, although my wife likes my playing. But it's very, I have difficulty with standard tunes with complex changes because I know what I want to play. I can play it on bass, but putting it together on piano is a little more difficult for me. But I can play my own stuff. I can sort of play things that are just invented out of my head. And I have a sensitive touch, and she likes the touch that I have. I'm not an aggressive bad player. As you probably heard, those of you who heard me play the Evie, I keep it down in the low end. Occasionally I jump up to the brash sounds, but I save that for the highlights, contrast. So this is the one time that Tonto went out on a live gig, and it was at this particular, after this broadcast, Bob had a bad time. He didn't like it. He's not a performing musician. He was a vocalist. He sang in the Tanglewood Choir. He was very, very good at many, many things. But performing live was not his forte. He didn't enjoy it, and he basically told me at that time he didn't want to continue being part of Tonto's expanding headband. He didn't want to continue being part of the company. He wanted to just be a producer, and he wanted to go it alone solo. So we broke up.
What year was, do you remember what year this?
74.
1974?
Yeah.
Let me jump to another picture here. This is...
Oh, this is before the cases for Tonto were built.
Oh, okay. Sorry to step around.
That's okay. This is chronologically out of order. And you can see the craziness there at the time. Bob's the guy standing over here. This is me, believe it or not. This was in my crazy period, where my Amish period. and look at the shirt with the hanging out there. everything. And something happened to the original photograph that got damaged. That white blotch there is.
That wasn't something Stevie
No,
was
that
wondering.
was just some blotch on the photograph. It got stuck to another photograph or something when we got separated. That happened.
Since we
But there's Stevie. Now this is the original Joystick. This was the first real important module that I built that made all the difference. This is the guy that is the aircraft controller. In the horizontal direction, it's sprung to return to center. In the vertical direction, it stays where you leave it. And these actually turn the pots physically because they're used with an aeroplane control to trim the ailerons and the rudder. Okay, so these are the trim pots. And you can see this one's all the way up because I'm obviously adjusted for up to the high end of the keyboard. So I used to use this with my thumb, okay, and the, either thumb, left hand, right hand, and use the joystick to bend it. And I would stand sometimes next to the performer who was playing Tonto, and sometimes I would even be in the control room and just run a long control cable over the Tonto. And they didn't know what I was doing. We never told them because, you know, we felt that that would be, that would be, you know, giving away the whole deal, and they wouldn't use us anyway. So this is what I used to keep Tonto in tune when other people played it, and even when I played it. And this is sort of like the surreptitious little control that once I go through going up to the upper range of the keyboard, I could move it to the right, which is where it is now, and it would still work with the centering to be able to do pitch bending. I used to do a lot of pitch bending and vibrato that way, and do vibrato and then timbrato up and down. Timbrato is when you change the timbre. Okay, so the vertical would go to the filter, and the horizontal would go to the pitch. That's how we got touch sensitivity before we had any touch sensitive keyboards. I still use it that way today. I used it at the NAMM show. I built myself this joystick is the original. It's up with Tonto, of course, in Calgary. So at the NAMM show in January, I had to build a new one. So I built it out of Radio Shack parts, same circuit and everything. And it worked fine for me. It was just perfect. So I was able to do my same old tricks, but on the Mode 35. However, Mode 35 is infinitely better in tune than Tonto was, because they've got 20 oscillators with the compensation trick that I discovered. You know, I don't want to take too much credit for that because it was sort of, I think, a mutual thing between myself, Ray Updike, and Bob. We sort of we came to it together. I don't want to make a false claim that I invented the thing. I think I might have been the initiator of the idea and how to do it, but the implementation and so on was a mutual effort. And so, you know, I never wanted to undermine Bob and his creativity because I highly respect him. To this day, I think he's a fantastic engineer who have come up with what he came up with, you know. And so I hate to try and say, oh yeah, I did this, I did that, because the whole thing is ego. At my age, ego doesn't matter, you know, especially when you've only got 3 years to live. So, the important thing is the end product and the fact that everybody gets to use it, and that the instrument gets better, and that people have the benefit of whatever it is you discover.